We're live. Here we go. So welcome, everyone. Like I just said, we're ecstatic to have you here. We are joined by some wonderful guest speakers, and we'll introduce them in a second. And today is all about how do you on this call go from being on a Zoom call to getting your dream job at a hospital in the United States. That's what we're here to guide you on and to help you with. So without further ado, why don't I kick it over to Mike Hammond? If you'd like to please introduce yourself to the crew, and we'll just go through everyone.
Yes, thanks. My name is Mike Hammond. I'm an immigration attorney based in Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm with a firm called Corporate Immigration Partners. I have been practicing immigration law for over 30 years. If you could see me on the Zoom screen, you would know it's at least 30, maybe 40, maybe 50. But it's been a while. I do work in mainly two areas. I do IT staffing and I do healthcare. I represent a number of hospital systems throughout the U.S. And obviously one of the areas in representing healthcare companies is RNs. My office does anywhere between about 4,000 to 5,000 RNs per year. So pretty high volume and deal with a lot of RN issues, and very happy to be here and hopefully can help you guys out some.
Thanks so much, Mike. And Sabrina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sabrina. I'm the Senior Manager for Immigration Services here at InSpring. And basically, my job is to make sure you're supported throughout your immigration journey and helping find out the best path for you. And I work closely with Mike's team to make sure everything's in order and also educating you guys as well as employers on the U.S. immigration system so you guys can advocate for yourselves.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you.
Hector.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. I'm the Senior Enrollment Manager. My job at InSpring is to make sure that you have an amazing journey through your application process. I'll be here to assist you. I was an international student myself. I'm a U.S. citizen today, but I went through the whole paperwork and the finance part of it, which is a challenge sometimes, but I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much, Eric.
It's my pleasure. We also have Alicia Jauhar here. She's on the call. Alicia, I know you're one of the attendees. I'm going to allow you to talk. That's the option it's making me do. Here, hold on. Alicia, please. Oh, there you are. Alicia, why don't you tell us who you are?
Hey everyone.
Hey.
So yeah, hi. My name is Alicia. I am working as a manager into healthcare recruitment within Spring Careers. And I have approximately 10 years of an experience into recruitment and staffing industry. So
nice.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you.
And then you're stuck with me, Eric, who I realized I didn't even have my video on when I was talking to you in the beginning. You didn't even know if it was me but that's me. You see me? That's me. I'm the Vice President of Recruitment for InSpring. And I'm just delighted to be here with all of you. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So anyone, I see Himani, you have your hand up, no problem. We're gonna have plenty of time to answer lots of questions. We want to utilize Mike's expertise and Sabrina's expertise on this call. And so sit back and listen and enjoy, and then we'll have plenty of time to answer all your questions. So let's just talk about the InSpring team here. Who are we? Again, if you're attending this call and you think, who is this? Is this an agency? What is this, like a staffing firm? What is going on here? What is going on is we want you to go from a Zoom call to getting a job at a hospital. You're going from a Zoom call to the hospital. We're not interested in corporate exercises, just doing Zoom webinars for the sake of it. This is to help you you are likely graduating US BSNs, or you've just graduated. You're about to take the NCLEX, or you just took the NCLEX. We are here to guide you on how to go from where you are to that dream job in the United States, in a hospital in the United States. And we only do direct permanent placement. We are not a staffing agency. You will not work for us. We're not interested in your working for us. We want you to work at the hospital directly. We want you to get the same benefits and experience as anyone else at that hospital there. And that's why we have Mike on this call. We're really lucky. We have Mike, we have Sabrina to guide you on how to go from where you are, graduating your great program, your great degree, and getting that dream job and doing it legally, the right way, making sure you know everything, all the questions that you have. So just to show you some slides, the numbers, basically what you need to know from this is that nurses are in high demand, essentially, is what this is saying. If you are graduating with a US BSN, you are coveted. You are basically the creme de la creme. No offense to any other country, but for a US hospital, if you have a US Bachelor of Nursing, you are in high demand, but we want to make sure you wield that demand the right way. It's one thing to be in high demand. It's another thing to know how to utilize that demand and get a good job and make sure that you do it the right way. So let's actually just go to Mike. So Mike, this is over to you. I will stop talking, and please, this is your show, and enjoy, everyone.
Okay, so since I can't see the slides, I'll describe them. So I want to be on the slide where it's got two pathways.
Yep, that's it.
Are we there? Perfect. Okay, so what we want to do during this talk, as Eric said, we want to kind of let you take advantage, give you some knowledge as to how to take advantage of what options you have because you are in high demand. And then we certainly want to leave plenty of time to answer any questions that you specifically might have. And this first slide, we're talking about two traditional pathways, and let's talk pathway one, which is the most common pathway that RNs, new U.S. grads pursue. And one of the things we want to kind of keep in mind as we kind of walk through these options is options for them to be successful. They have to work for you personally, what works for you, your family, and also what works for the employer that you're ultimately going to go to. So we need a match in the options. So let's talk about pathway one, traditional pathway. This is where you graduate from a U.S. school. You've got a BSN, you get an NTT, you take your NCLEX, you pass. Your school's helped you arrange for an OPT EAD card, which is either issued right around graduation or shortly thereafter. And now you're a free agent. You can go work for anyone without any need for any sponsorship. However, that OPT card, as you'll notice, is only good for a year. And it cannot be extended, although most of us would agree that nursing is a STEM degree. It is not considered a STEM degree under the USCIS rules, which means the 2-year STEM extension is not available to nurses, where it would be for, say, for example, med techs, certain engineers, et cetera. So you've got a 1 year. And that's nice. You can go work wherever you want, whatever hospital you want, facility, long-term care, whatever you feel like doing. But it only lasts a year. So you need a plan beyond that 1 year. And so the traditional plan is to go through what people refer to as the EB3 green card. And EB3 simply means the EB stands for employment base. We've got employment base 1, 2, 3, technically 4. It's going away soon, and then 5. Workers traditionally use categories 1, 2, and 3, and RNs all fall under, or at least 99% under the EB3 category. And that's just another term for an immigrant visa or a green card. And up until about a year ago, maybe a year and a half now, that 1 year OPT that you have in your hand when you graduate was sufficient to get you to far enough down the green card path to actually get you a green card before the OPT expired, or at least get you a work card through the process before the OPT expired. And we're going to talk about that in a second. We've now got retrogression. We've had it since last year. And let's flip to the next slide, and then we'll flip back to this one.
Sure. I'll go, Mike.
So
now we're looking at the retrogression numbers that Sabrina uploaded. Yeah.
So there's a chart on the left-hand side of the page, and this comes straight from something called the April 2024 Visa Bulletin. So the Visa Bulletin is a publication issued by the Department of State. It comes out each month. It's free. You can go online You can sign up for it, and it'll get emailed to you at the same time it's emailed to me. Nobody gets advance notice except the consulates. And what you want to do is to kind of explain to you how this chart reads. There's two charts in the visa bulletin, and what Sabrina has printed out here for you is the final action date chart, which shows that if you were born in any country other than China, India, Mexico, or the Philippines, you're in that first column called all chargeability areas, okay? So some people refer to this as ROW, rest of the world. That's how the column used to be headed many, many years ago, and it's kind of held on. So you're going to look at the third category, so EB3, and you're going to go across. And if you happen to have been born in China or India, your line is really, really long. Mexico, Philippines, and everybody else in the whole rest of the world are at November 2022. There is a second chart called the date for filing chart, and if we had that up, we would show that the date is February 2023. So the chart that's up there right now says how long it takes, final action, when you can get a green card. So we're now right now sitting in March 2024, and they're only giving green cards out to RNs, let's call it, in the EB3 category from, say, Nigeria, for example, who filed before November 22nd, 2022. So the line is about a year and a half long, okay? So if we back up and go, oh man, my OPT is only good for 1 year, and it's taken me over a year to get the green card, what am I going to do? So now let's flip back to the prior slide again. And we've got two things we want to interject. First of all, if you're following along on pathway 1, you'll see that after you've joined the hospital, they filed an I-140 for you, you'll see a little small arrow in there that actually is labeled bridging options before priority date becomes current. And let's talk about what that means, and then we'll go down to pathway 2, because pathway 2 is one of those bridging options. So we're at the hospital now. We're going back in time. We're at the hospital. We joined. We passed our boards. We finished our orientation. Everything's going great. The hospital has now agreed to sponsor us for our EB3 green card, and we file the first stage. The first stage is simply a form number called I-140. It's just a number. The day we file that I-140 and it's received by the USCIS, we get something called a priority date. The easiest way to think of a priority date is it's your personal spot in line, your spot in the queue. So if we file today is March, 12th or 13th, and the case gets filed tomorrow or received tomorrow, assuming tomorrow really is the 14th, I'm off on my days, but you will have a priority date, a spot in line of March 14th. That is the date you're going to think about when you're comparing it to the date for filing chart that we just showed you a minute ago. And if you have a date that says March 14th, 2024, you recognize you're not before November 22nd, 2022 on that chart, so you cannot get your green card issued. So now if we're in a line that's going to take us more than a year and a half to get to the next stage of the line of the green card process, we need another option. We need something that bridges the gap. So look down at pathway 2. We've labeled it there F-1 to H-1B, okay? And one of the pathways that you could choose, or you and an employer can choose, is instead of going the F-1 to EB3 route, you could go directly F-1 to H-1B. And there, the first part of it looks very similar. You graduate, you get your OPT, you pass your boards, you start joining the hospital on OPT, EAD card, it's good for a year. At some point during that year, you file for the H-1B. Now, we're going to talk more about the H-1B here in just a minute, but let's just talk about the concept here just for a second. An H-1B gives you the opportunity to work initially for 3 years, and it can be extended for 6 years, up to a max of 6. And we're going to talk about what it means to get an H-1B here in a second. But let's think about this from the context of there's a pathway that doesn't include EB3, that includes the H-1B directly to the H-1B, okay? Now, let's jump back up to the pathway 1, where we've got F-1 to EB3 route, and we're all the way out at that little arrow that says looking for ways to bridge the gap. One of the ways to bridge the gap from when your OPT expires to when you can go to the next stage of the green card process is via an H-1B. So some individuals in some hospitals are going to say, we need to bridge the gap, and we're going to do an H-1B to allow you to bridge the gap. So you can use the H-1B even if you're in pathway number 1. Okay? Now, one of the things, there are other ways to bridge the gap we'll talk about here in a second, but certainly one of the things to consider is that H-1B can be a potential bridge there. It does not have to be the sole path as we've got outlined in pathway 2, even though that is an option for some individuals. Before we move to the next screen, I want to quickly touch on, there's a couple unique visas. One is called a TN. That is for individuals who are nationals of Mexico or Canada. And the second is something called an H-1B1, which are individuals who are nationals of Chile or Singapore. So if you happen to be from one of those 4 countries, there are some special rules from you. Make sure you reach out and let InSpring know so that they know that there are some special options for you. Okay, so now let's go back to the next page, the one that had the visa retrogression chart on it. And let's talk about the second part of that page, which is the H-1Bs. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time on H-1Bs here, and then we'll kind of try to tie it all together and then answer questions. Now, if we were having this conversation a year ago, we would have not spent much time on the H-1Bs. And the reason why is the H-1B is a visa class in the U.S. It's one of the most common visas used in the U.S. It is limited to those professions and jobs, occupations, where the standard, the norm for entry into that occupation is at least a bachelor's degree. So H-1Bs are used for engineers, they're used for doctors, in the healthcare space, they're routinely used for med techs, OTs, PTs, all of which have the standard to get a license in every single state in the U.S. of at least a bachelor's degree. Contrast that with the RN standard. In every state in the U.S., all 50 states, the standard to get a license is not a BSN. You can have in some states an associate's, a diploma, some other states even have other programs, but generally speaking, in most states, it's an associate's or an associate's and or a diploma type program, but it's not a BSN. So traditionally, H-1Bs have not been available to RNs. Now, we go back 20 years ago, and there were some special carve-outs, but essentially for the last 10 years or so, there have been very limited H-1Bs ever given to RNs. And then last year, on July 1st, the Department of Labor put out some new updates that are not necessarily immigration updates. The Department of Labor simply puts out every year what they consider to be employment trends throughout the U.S. for different occupations. Is it in high demand? Is it in low demand? Are wages increasing? Are wages decreasing? What's the educational standards? Are there new license requirements, et cetera? A whole series of pieces of information about literally thousands of occupations in the U.S., and these come out in something called the Occupational Outlook Handbook. It's a Department of Labor publication. It's not an immigration publication. It's used by employers and job seekers in schools and all kinds of reasons. One of the things it does is it creates something, it's called job zones, okay? And the registered nurse job zone, and we've got a copy of it here for you so that you can see why, because it's such big news, moved to a job zone 4. So up until July 1st, 2023, this job zone for registered nurses said job zone 3. Now, if you look at the education part underneath the job zone 4, we've got title and then education, and it says most of these occupations require a 4-year bachelor's degree, but some do not. Okay, that change in the language has allowed this expansion of the H-1B to be available to RNs at a much greater pace than what we've seen over the last 10 years. The Department of Labor recognized that in hospitals around the U.S., a lot of hospitals have gone to where they want a BSN to hire you. They also, some of them that maybe not are saying you have to have a BSN to get hired, they may be having a program where you have to achieve a BSN within a certain period of time. So if you're out on the Indeed or LinkedIn or any other job board right now and you're going to XYZ hospital and you're looking at their RN position descriptions, you're going to often see something like, we'll hire based upon an associate's degree and a license or a diploma and a license, but you must get a BSN within 3 years or 6 years or whatever the program is. That's a very common language we see at a lot of hospitals. A lot of you are seeing that you guys are obviously coming out of a BSN program, but you're probably seeing if the school you're at now also has an associate's level program, a lot of people going through the associate's level program are being encouraged to go on and finish their BSN because that will give them more job opportunities because that's the direction it's going. So we've got that change in the Department of Labor policy and recognition that hospitals are more and more looking for BSNs. Okay, so let's flip to the next page.
We're there.
And here we're talking. Okay, great. Here we're talking more about the H-1 specifically, okay? So when we're looking and saying, hey, we want to use the H-1B either as my direct path to work in the U.S., like what we called Pathway 2, or we want to use it to bridge the gap, there's a couple things. First of all, the employer, and this is all here in the left-hand column, the employer needs to sponsor individuals without going through the lottery if they are nonprofit, what we call cap exempt. So basically nonprofit affiliated with a university. So there's a lot of hospitals. Not every hospital is like this. There are some for-profit hospital systems in the U.S., but there are a lot of hospitals who are cap exempt. They're nonprofits. They're affiliated with a university. Probably you may have done your clinicals at one of them. Because for you to do your clinicals at a hospital, they have to be affiliated with a university, the university per se that you went to. Now, they may or may not be a nonprofit, so I'm not saying specifically the hospital you did your clinicals at will be cap exempt, but they at least meet the affiliation standard, okay? So we start with hospitals, and InSpring will make sure that we've got a hospital that actually meets that standard. And then the second part is the position has to meet that standard. And we look at that in a couple of different ways. We first of all look at that and say, what does the hospital overall demand? What is their norm? What do they want? Is it a BSN for the entire hospital? And there's some like that, not many, but there's some. Then we get more specific and we go, well, if it's not the hospital overall, maybe it's a particular unit. Maybe the ER unit, maybe OR, maybe ICU, maybe NICU. Might be a particular unit where in that unit they want higher educated, more experienced type RNs on that particular floor because of the specialty nature of that particular floor. And so we'll look at that unit and we'll say for this hospital and this particular unit, they can file for H-1Bs. Now you, the other part of the coin, you're easy because you have a BSN or we wouldn't be having this call. So your side of it, do I meet the standard? The answer is yes, you have a BSN or you will have it here come spring. The question is usually, can we find a hospital that also has the BSN kind of standard is the term I like to use. Now, let's back up just for a minute in our pathways that we talked about. So we talked about the idea of the traditional pathway is I come out of school, I graduate, I've got my OPT EAD, I now join a hospital, they're sponsoring me for my EB3, and now I've got this gap that's going to happen because my priority date's not moving fast enough. And we talked about the H-1B route as a possible kind of gap filler. There are some other gap fillers as well. We think of gap fillers meeting two tests. Number one is status. You want to stay legal in the U.S. in order to buy enough time to get you far enough along so that you come to the front of the line, and then you can file your next stage of the green card process, which, by the way, is called the I-485. So you're looking for status first. So the second part we're looking for is, can I work during this bridging the gap? Okay? We'd like both to be met, but status is most important. Okay? There are things that will give us status without giving us the ability to work. There's nothing that gives us the ability to work without also giving us status. Okay? So one of the most common approaches we use during this time frame are individuals that go back to school and re-enroll in school, get a new I-20, typically in a master's level program. There's literally, 25, 30, 35 that we've identified here in the U.S. at least so far, and there's probably others that we've not ran across, who have master's level programs. Not always MSNs. Sometimes they'll be MSNs, but often they will be maybe an MBA, but in a healthcare type role, patient care. There's a variety of types of master's level programs in healthcare administration and other things that will meet this standard. And they will then issue something called first day CPT. And if you Google that term, you'll see all kinds of it. IT people have been using these programs for years because of the lottery system. And we've really only started to be using it for RNs, frankly, in the last 8 to 9 months, because it really wasn't necessary before then till retrogression kicked in. But so a master's level school will give you, not always, but you have to ask about this, first day CPT that does two things. It keeps you in status, and it allows you to work. So you go to school online. A lot of the schools will have programs where you have to, come here actually specifically physically on the facility, on the campus, one day a month, twice a month, once a week, whatever. Every school has their own little rules as to how often you actually have to physically show up. The rest of it's obviously done online. And schools are very happy to create these programs for you because obviously they make money after these programs are created. But nonetheless, from your perspective, it gets you what you need. It buys you time, it keeps you in status, and allows you to keep working. So that's the most common bridge, the gap. So we've talked at least two bridges for the gap. We've talked about the H-1, which is going to fit for some. We talked about bridging the gap through CPT. There are some others. Some of them will give you status but not work authorization. For example, if you have a spouse who's here as a student as well, you may switch to an F-2, a dependent visa, instead of an F-1. And then, frankly, there are some individuals who maybe your best scenario for you is that you actually go home for a year and wait overseas for your lot to move forward in the line, because maybe you've got parents that you need to help take care of. Maybe you just, miss mom's cooking. Maybe you found a great opportunity in Australia to work for a year, or in Canada to work for a year, and then we'll come back. So one of the things, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, is this immigration process, you need to own it because it's yours. It has to be what fits best for you, not necessarily what fits what you think everybody else is doing or your friend is doing. You got to look at it and go, this works for me and my family and what I would like to do best. Now, let's talk just one more second about the pathways, and then I'll open it up for some questions. Let's pretend you're faced with a scenario of a hospital is willing to do either pathway for you. They're happy to do an H-1 for you while you're on your OPT. They're happy to do a straight to EB-3. In a scenario like that, I would always pick the EB-3 and then do the H-1 as your bridge. So you're kind of doing both. because the EB3 has long-term positive for you. The H-1B, fast, short-term, get you over that bridge, okay? If you are someone, some scenarios where there might be some hospitals who say, I want you to do an H-1B first. I want you to work for us for 6 months, and then I'll do your EB3. That's perfectly fine too. That can work an arrangement for you as well. So there are times. So don't think of them as pathway 1 or pathway 2. They can work that way, but they can also definitely work together. And I realize some of that's a little confusing, but we have a wonderful system that the government has decided to make as confusing as possible, I guess because it gives people like me jobs, but they certainly have not made it simple. What's crazy about this, as you're sitting here listening to this, is the RN, the occupation you are at, is a preferred occupation in the U.S. in that you get to skip an entire stage of the green card process. Med techs, OTs, doctors go through a totally separate process. They have one extra step to the green card process called PERM, or labor certification, that is right now taking about 2 years to do. And you as an RN, and then there's PTs and one other minor occupation that goes a special provision, you get to skip all of stage 1. So as complicated as it sounds right now for you, what I've gone through, if you're a med tech, you've got a more complicated process and a significantly longer process. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there, and we'll take questions as, yeah.
And can you go over, just because I know people are going to have questions about it, if they have spouses, like how can they work if they're on H-1B? Can they work if they're on like a TD visa? Because I know a lot of people have families, so I just want to cover that because I know someone's going to ask.
Okay. Yep. Great point. Okay. So spouses on H-1s are eligible for what's called an H-4. It's a dependent visa. It does not allow them to work. However, if you're on an H-1 and then you get an I-140 approved, the first stage of the EB3 green card process, then your spouse can apply for a EAD card on the H-4 after your I-140 is approved. It does take right now about 5 to 6 months, but that is possible. In the green card process, the EB3 process, your spouse will get a green card at the exact same time as you. You are bundled together. And they will get an EAD card or work card as part of your 485 process. They do not get a work card as part of your I-140, okay? So if you were starting out, let's say you graduate in May, you join a hospital in June, your OPT is good for a year, and they start your green card process, let's pretend they started immediately in June of 2024. I would guess for your spouse that the earliest they would be able to work is sometime December of 2025 or January 2026, probably at least a year and a half. So there are options for spouses working, but they're not necessarily fast.
Yeah,
Okay.
and also I just want to add to that. I always recommend that, even though hospitals do pay the bulk of, immigration fees, because they have to for H-1B, for example, always have a savings account, just put some cash in there because, for example, if you want to file, if they're okay, like they say, okay, we're going to file the F-1, they're going to file the I-140, but they're like, we're not going to do, premium processing, which guarantees adjudication in about 2 weeks, then you have the option to pay for that. And that will guarantee that, you'll have the approved I-140 in the 2 weeks, if done correctly and everything, which I'm sure it will be. And then your spouse can work faster. But sometimes the hospital is not going to agree to pay for that if it's not necessary. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good point.
Thanks, Sabrina. Good question. Thanks a lot, Mike. Good questions, good debate, good answers. I hope everyone's taking notes. This is for you, just so you know. I'm going to read some questions aloud, Mike, and then we'll kind of just go from there. I'm on the pathways slide, Mike. I went back there just so you know. I went back to pathways 1 and 2. So Satabdi. I hope I got that right. I'm sorry if I did not pronounce your name correctly. So asking first, do you sponsor H1 cap exempt? And I'm an Indian nurse working as an RN in Texas right now. Already an
Okay,
RN.
so yes, so if you are an Indian nurse, then pathway 1, the F1 to EB3 would never work. The process is simply too long. The queue is too long. The queue for EB3 India is in the 10 to, I don't know, 14-year mark, depending on what calculations you look at. Some people actually even put it longer than that. So the only option you would have available would be the H-1B. Now, that doesn't mean you couldn't get file for an EB3 case, but you will be in an extremely long line to do so. So you definitely have to have an H-1B sponsor. And one of the things then to keep in mind is that for most of us, not all of us, but for most of us, we're not going to keep a job, the same job, for 15 years, which means every time you want to change employers, you need to find another employer who is a cap-exempt employer who meets the H-1B standards and can sponsor you for an H-1B, and then they will have to sponsor you for a green card again. So you don't start all the way at the beginning again. You get to keep your priority dates. You get to keep your spot in the queue. But you would be on a path like a lot of engineers are in the U.S. Right now, they're working on individuals who were filed back in 2012 for India. So long line. But yes, the H-1B is your only option. A lot of Indian nationals go to Canada because the immigration process is easier. They spend time in Canada. They achieve Canadian citizenship, and then they come into the U.S. on a TN. So, but the H-1B definitely will work if you find the right spot, but it does not change how long it takes to get a green card.
Yeah, and most of you probably know that H-1B lasts, about 6 years. And usually if you get an approved I-140, at least to have the I-140, they're going to have to wait 10 years, but having that approved I-140 will let you extend your H-1B indefinitely. So yeah, you'll probably still be with us, at least you'll probably still go through, the I-140 process just so, you can stay as long as you want. And it's important to also note that you can port your priority date. So if you get approved I-140 today, and you're eligible for another job in 6 years, you can port the priority date and keep it. So you don't have to, keep starting over. And for all you Indian nationals out there, it's important also to know that if you have a spouse that was born in a different country, like Dubai, for example, you can use them to use everyone else, the chart that we showed you for the rest of the world. You don't have to use the Indian priority date chart. You can use the rest of the world chart. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Next question. Good stuff. Anonymous attendee asks, and I'm going to say, yes, this applies to you. This webinar is for you. But I'll read it aloud, Mike. I'm a BSN graduated in India, did my master's in public health from NYU, but my ultimate goal is to become an RN with exclamation marks. Very excited, and we love that. And going to give my NCLEX soon. So will this webinar help me? So master's in public health from NYU, but BSN is from India.
Okay, so I'm assuming an Indian national since you did a BSN, or since you did your BSN in India, yeah. I'm assuming, which would mean that some masters in public health are going to give you an OPT that will allow you to work for a year as an RN. Others might be more strict as to how closely they want your work on the OPT to be tied to your public health program. That'll be up to your school. Will determine that. But long term, after that OPT's up, you're going to need an H-1B. That's the only route.
Thanks. Yeah, I think what I'd love to do is, Hector, do you mind putting the application link in the chat so people can just have that? It's free to apply. The reason we're doing that is so we can look at your documentation, all of your licensure, all that stuff we'd like to see. It's free to apply. So Hector's going to put a link in the chat, and then we're going to continue. Mike, I'll read aloud some more questions. So Satabdi, excuse me, is just saying, I'm an Indian citizen. What is the best way to get an H-1B visa? I don't know if there's a easy answer for that.
Well, I mean, I think you've got to do what you can control on your side, which is that you pass the boards. You need a visa screen in order to get an H-1B. And so those are two things in your control. And then after that, it's simply matching with an employer who is interested in hiring you personally and meets the qualifications for an H-1B.
Thanks, Mike. And I would say, same individual, any way to apply EB2 or EB1 as RN with an MS or RN? This is, we're assuming, Satadbi, you're an Indian national. So Mike, anyway, there's no way, correct? If you're,
There's zero way to do an EB1. The EB1 is limited to individuals who are working for overseas companies and being transferred in as executives. So EB1 is out. EB2, if you have a master's degree in, you could try to demonstrate that you are in the national interest. It would not be applicable ever for a patient care nurse. But if you are a nurse educator, so you're a university professor in nursing, you could make an argument, particularly if you've someone who's published quite a bit and spoken on a variety of nursing topics. I think you could make a good, what they call NIW or national interest waiver argument. The individual who has a public health degree, if you are working in public health, particularly in maybe a rural area or an area where there's a high shortage of displaced or disadvantaged individuals, you might be able to make a good national interest waiver argument and be under the EB2 category. Keep in mind, though, for an Indian national, the EB2 line is as long or longer than the EB3 line. So getting into the EB2 category doesn't necessarily make your green card process go any faster. If you were doing public health work and you were, or you had an MSN and you were teaching, you clearly get an H-1B though. And public health work, you're going to get an H-1B too. But that's not patient care. So it's not what we would typically consider as an RN type position.
Thanks, Mike. All right, moving on. Anonymous attendee says, I'm from Brazil. I didn't study here. I have an F-1 visa and I'm studying regular English. I passed the NCLEX and IELTS. Can I apply for the H-1B? I don't have a work permit or OPT.
Okay, what status are you're on an F-1 right now? Is that how that reads?
I'm assuming he or she has an F-1 visa.
They're studying English on an F-1
English.
visa, right?
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina.
So studying English on an F-1.
Yeah. But passed the NCLEX and has an IELTS, so already has the NCLEX.
Yeah, you'd have to check your visa stamp. A lot of F-1s that are issued F-1s to study English only are given what's called a no change of status notation on their visa stamp that would not allow them to change to an H-1. So that would be very common. Not always there, but nonetheless, you'd have to look at that. But aside from that, and you could cure that by simply going back home and waiting for the H-1 and getting a visa stamp and coming in. But if you already have your NCLEX, once you get your visa screen, then you'd be eligible for an H-1. And the fact you didn't graduate from a U.S. school, Indian nursing schools are, in my experience, I don't know, 99% of the time I've seen, they are equivalent to a U.S. bachelor's BSN. And so the education itself would certainly not be a hurdle at all.
And this person's from Brazil, Mike, just so you know, that person.
Oh, from Brazil. So you'd have to check to see, is your Brazilian RN degree equivalent to a U.S. degree, bachelor's degree? If it's not, and it's only an associate's degree, then you would not be eligible for the H-1 route, but you might be eligible for the EB3 route. But that would eliminate one of the bridges available for the gap, but you still got the other one, which is an F-1. I think clearly you would still be an attractive candidate, even though your education's overseas. But you need to determine that it's equivalent. Normally, if you were eligible to get an ATT, which you obviously did in order to take the NCLEX exam, then you would have had a CES evaluation done by the state in order to qualify. So your education likely is okay.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, please apply.
Yeah,
And
we'll look at you more.
Yeah, we can
Look all your
assess.
stuff. Yeah.
I'm gonna come back to you, Sadadbi, because you've asked good questions, but I want to give a few other people a chance. And Himani, yeah, I'll give you time to chat at the end. Okay, I'm gonna get through all the written questions. Hey, Quay, what's up? I'll see you in Vietnam soon. So our buddy Quay says, how long is the current queue for Vietnamese nurses, and which pathway would they take, one or two?
I would say for a Vietnamese nurse, they come under the ROW, rest of the world category. So about 1.5 to 2 years is how long it would take. If you're overseas, 1.5 to 2 years. If you're in the U.S. and a U.S. grad, then I would probably be inclined to. I would always personally take 1 and 2 if I could. So. It's like being at the table and being offered cake and ice cream. Don't you always take both cake and ice cream? Or maybe it's just me. But if you start on 1 and then the easy gap, bridge the gap is 2, then that bridges the gap and avoids you having to go back to school. So I like that because it doesn't cost you any more money. You're done with school. But if you option 1 and the hospital doesn't meet the H-1B standards, and you bridge the gap through a master's degree and then still working first day CPT, that works too. And it is unlikely that the Vietnamese line is going to get spread out to go like where China and India has, and Mexico in the past, and Vietnam, and the Philippines in the past. They generally, the rest of the world line has generally stayed ahead of all the other lines.
Mm-hmm. And all the worst, just to put this out there, the hospitals that we're working with, how they're thinking about it, just to put it out there, is, apply for the H-1B, and then, after 6 months or a year, just to make sure you're doing a good job, then they'll apply for, at least the I-140 to get your place in line, because they are, investing a lot of money in you, especially with the H-1B. So just keep that in mind. That's usually how the hospitals, at least that we're talking to, are thinking about it.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good point. And money they're going to be investing is even going to go up again here in about 3 weeks, because the filing fees for H-1Bs are going up really a little over $1,000.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So all of a sudden, we're talking a fairly huge investment, and hospitals, like every other employer, are looking to have a return on their investment, just like you.
Thanks, Mike and Sabrina. Just so you know, we added a new application link. The other one, this is the correct one. If you started applying, it's fine with the old one. This is the one, it should say registered nurse when you apply. So Hector put in the new link. It's okay if you started the old one, but we have a new updated application link. Please use that one. All right, Essie Johnson says, I will be graduating with my BSN in May and plan to pursue a TN visa following my OPT. Do TN visas require employer sponsorship?
Yes. So the employer sponsorship is pretty simple. You will obviously graduate. You'll pass your boards, so that gives you the state license, or will get you the state license. You will need something called a visa screen from either one of 2 organizations, CGFNS or Joseph Silney. They issue the visa screens. You'll need the visa screen in hand. Right now for U.S. grads, it's taken about 2 to 3 months to obtain. I don't know the timing on Silney because I don't have as many people use them, so I'm not positive. But 2 to 3 months from CGFNS. The TN can be done generally at the border. Border meaning physical border. You're driving over at Buffalo, or you're at the airport at Pearson and Toronto. So when entry, it requires sponsorship, but the sponsorship is very simple on the part of employers. Most hospitals will sponsor TNs, not all. There are some specific unions that will not allow certain hospitals to sponsor TNs. So there are some restrictions, so don't think every hospital will do it, but most will. And it's simply a letter describing the job, guaranteeing a certain rate of pay, and a variety of things like that, but very basic to obtain. And then you can decide, do you ever want a green card in the U.S. or not? And if you don't, your plan is to just work in the U.S. 4 or 5 years, you can just keep working on a TN. It's good for 3 years. It can be extended again. It technically does not have a max out date, even though if you've been working on one for 15 or 20 years, that can be problematic. But generally speaking, it does not have a max out date. And there's no requirement that you have to go from a TN to a green card. You can, but a lot of people, Canadians, choose not to. So, but yeah, that will work.
Thanks, Mike. And Essie asks, same person. In other words, should I be answering yes or no to the question, will you now or in the future require employer sponsorship?
You should answer yes.
Okay.
Because you will. Yep.
Thanks. Louisa from Kenya says, Louisa Theru says, I am Kenyan and I just graduated with my RN associate's degree from a school here in the US and I'm studying to take the NCLEX. Ooh, what is my process like? Associate's degree, Mike, but studying to finish the associate's to then take the NCLEX.
Okay. So you're going to have no trouble with the I-140. So you graduate with your associate's degree, pass the boards, get your OPT, and get a job, okay? Hospital will file the I-140 for you. However, with an associate's degree, the gap you're going to have, you don't have any good options to bridge because you're not eligible for an H-1 because you don't have a BSN, and you're not eligible for first day CPT because that's only available for master's degrees, and you can't go from an associate's to a master's. So you're going to be able to bridge the gap and maintain status by re-enrolling in school, maybe do a BSN if you want to, but you're not going to be able to keep working. So during that period of time, and let's say that period 6 months, 2 things have to happen. Number one, your hospital has to be willing to let you work for 10 months to a year on your OPT and then stop working, okay? And then you have to be willing to figure out what you can do for 6 months. Can you live in the U.S. without income? And so that's a situation where you might look at an option of simply returning home during that bridge the gap or going to another country and then coming back. So that's probably the most complicated fact pattern is the U.S. grad with an associate's degree where the bridge is not, doesn't have very many good options. But it can definitely be done. And I will say this, not all hospitals will allow you to have that much time off and bridge the gap by being gone, but quite a few will. Staffing companies will more than hospitals will. So sometimes you get stuck with an employer that you may not, that may not be a preferred employer, but it is someone who is at least willing to do that. So.
Thanks, Mike. And I'll say, Mike, are you good to stay a little bit longer? Because we have a lot of good questions. What's your timing?
Sure. I'm okay till 5 to 10 after.
All right. Good.
And I just want to add really quick, if you do have associate's degree and you're like, I want to do the H-1B path, then you can, there are programs out there where you can do like a RN to ABSN program. And we're looking for some to like, recommend to you guys. We're in the process of that. So keep that in mind.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Yep.
All right. So interesting question. Anonymous attendee asks, I'd like to know the process that can be followed for nurses who pass the NCLEX but are legally in the US. Curious, sort of reinstatement. Any chance, Mike, for someone like this?
It depends upon how they're illegal in the US.
Okay.
Are they calling themselves illegal because they're on DACA? Are they calling themselves illegal because they don't have status, but they really are TPS or asylum applicant? So it depends on, and this would be a specific inquiry related to your circumstance. And it would also, the answer would vary by how long you've been here, how did you enter? So there's a whole lot of specific questions that would just need a individual one-on-one kind of consultation. It can be done. It's not easy though.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
can
and
still like apply, and then we can talk about it because everyone's
yeah.
different. Because if
We're
you're
treat-
F1, if you overstay your F1, you can talk to university to get reinstated, but that's just one situation.
And we'll treat it anonymously and confidentially. If you apply, we promise, we'll work with you. If you choose to apply and you'd like us to keep it confidential, of course, it's always confidential. Okay, thanks for asking and thanks for trusting us and joining. I'm a BSN student and I recently finished my OPT of healthcare admin degree. And when I enrolled for the BSN, I was informed I won't be eligible for another OPT at the end of my nursing degree. Is there a pathway for a person like me to get a job, Mike?
The reason why you're not eligible for another OPT is you only get a second OPT if you do a higher level program. So since you did 2 bachelor's level programs, you only get the 1 OPT. So what you have to find is once you finish, you are back to our chart, the PowerPoint chart, you are pathway 2. Because you need an employer to sponsor you for an H1 because you are not having an OPT as an option. And then after you get on the H1B, then you can go up to pathway 1. So most people would go pathway 1, pathway 2 is the bridge. You need to go pathway 2, and then pathway 1 added on later as the long-term plan. But yeah, you can absolutely do it.
And you have like that 60 days after you graduate, but you would have to also do all your licensure if you haven't already before your F1, that grace period expires to do your H1B so you can get filed in that time period. But we can't file the H1B unless you have like all your licensure good to go. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, and one of the things, let's pretend for a second that CGFNS gets slow on issuing visa screens and they don't issue it within those 60 days. Then what you would do is you would do a H-1B with something called consular processing, which means you would not be asking for a change of status from F1 to H1, but you instead would be asking for the consulate to be notified of your H-1B approval, which would mean that you're intending to file for your H-1 during the 60-day grace period, leave the U.S., go home, wait for the H-1 approval, and wait for the CGFNS visa screen under my hypo, then go to the consulate, get a new visa stamp, an H-1 stamp at this point, come back in, and then you could work. And so, and that happens all the time for all kinds of occupations. So that would not be viewed negatively by a hospital. Obviously, it works better if you could get your visa screen issued within those 60 days, and they do have some expedite processes, but it doesn't happen all the time. I'll just tell you that.
Thanks, Mike. Anonymous attendee says, I'm a Nigerian citizen in the US. I'm finishing my BSN in June at a US university, but I'm not an F1 student. How does this work to get a sponsorship to become an RN?
Well, the question would become, what status are they on? Are they dependent? Are they here legally? So we'd have to know what status they were on in order to determine. But assuming you're here legally as, say, a dependent, let's say you're an H4, then we would look at the H1 route for you. We would also, depending on the status you're on, look and see what other options. Like if you really were a H4 dependent, you would be eligible to work maybe faster based upon your spouse's I-140 approval. So, but the status they're on now would depend what path they could go.
Please apply and we'll do our best to give you guidance. Marilyn says, I'm an RN and my OPT ends in June 2024, and I have been approved for the I-140 with a priority date of February 20th, 2024. Will I have to go back to school when my OPT ends, or can I work with the approval?
You cannot work with the approval. So an approved I-140 does not give you any legal status nor work authorization. So come June 2024, when your OPT expires, you have to stop working. So you need another mechanism. You either need an H-1B or you need to go back to school with an F-1. And an H-1B, you would have to look at your current employer. because they're the ones who filed your I-140, and they only filed it in February. They just filed it last month. So if you can't find an H-1 with them, because maybe they don't do H-1s, then you're going to probably lose that priority date. So you may have some, I'm assuming that an attorney helped you with your I-140. The attorney probably works for the hospital, just like most do, work for employers. But I would probably reach out. They probably have some specific information available for you as to what the plan is, because I'm sure they filed the I-140 in February last month with a plan toward what they were going to do with you come June. So
Yeah. And you can always,
they may not have shared the plan with you, but I'm sure they have a plan.
yeah, and you can always ask them to, I mean, this is, if you really want that priority date, you can upgrade to premium processing if you really want to spend that money, but it's expensive. But yeah, I think H-1B, we can help you with that. If you do want to change employers, we can help.
Yep. Mike, we have a few more questions. If you have to go, just let us know. No problem.
And I can help answer them too if Mike has.
Yeah.
That's my ability.
Yeah, we'll stay on with you. Mariam says, hi, I'm a United Kingdom citizen currently on a B1 visa. I'm due to take my NCLEX this month. If I pass, can I apply for H-1B? I've been working as a NICU nurse in London. I have a bachelor in nursing that was approved by Washington State, approved evaluators as equivalent to a BSN in nursing in USA.
Okay, well, most individuals from the UK come in on something called the B1 waiver program, which means you can't change status. So you would get an H-1. You could find an employer that will sponsor you for an H-1, but you're going to go back to London, get the H-1 visa stamp at the consulate in London, and then come back in. Because not only do you still need to pass your boards, you still need to get visa screen. You're not going to get that done within the time frame you have on your visa waiver. So, but yes, absolutely. The fact that you've already got your equivalency evaluated, you know it's a BSN equivalent. As soon as you pass the board, you're eligible for the visa screen, and you just need an employer. So you could go pathway 2 would probably be the best way to go.
Great. What do you think, Mike? One or two more questions while we have you?
I could do one more. I got to do one more.
All right, let's get someone new.
The most complicated ones.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Oh, great. Thanks.
There's some great questions here, everyone. I know we're trying to get to everyone. I think I'll go with Colorado, Aura in Colorado, and then we're going to stay on with everyone else. Aura in Colorado says, thank you for answering my question. I am a BSN RN in the US, but I lost my tourist status almost 2 years ago. What could I do to access the green card? Thanks a lot.
So it sounds like Oren came into the U.S. on a tourist visa and then has overstayed for 2 years.
Yeah.
Which means that Oren would not have either of the pathways we've talked about. In order to file for either pathway, you have to show that you're legally here in status, and that would not be the case. So, Oren, you probably need to speak to an immigration attorney about what your long-term plan is and what your long-term options are. They're not simple because there is what I call a 3-year, 10-year bar that once you overstay for a certain period of time, you subject yourself to a bar from reentry for 10 years. And that would be applicable in your case unless there's some information we don't know. So you need to be very, very careful about what your next step is in how you process. And so I would encourage you to speak to a personal immigration attorney that can help you with what a long-term plan might look like. So, and a long-term plan, depending on your age, it might look like, graduating, from school, passing the boards, getting a state license, and then leaving and working for 10 years overseas. And then saying, hey, I've got this potential. I got an education in the U.S. It's a great education. I can get a job anywhere I want. I have my license, and at some point in the future, I'll come back. And if you're young enough, that may make some sense. If you're my age, that makes no sense. But you want to talk to a personal immigration attorney who can look at your situation to determine what options are available for you. And hopefully there's more options than what we can tell from the question. Okay,
All right.
I'm sorry I got to run, guys. I appreciate the time. Good luck to everyone. I'm happy to follow up with anything. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. We're staying on, everyone. Thank you so much for your time, Mike. We
Okay.
appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. See ya. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Don't run away, everyone. We have help. We have help here. Sabrina's an absolute
Try my best.
expert. Yeah, we're gonna guide you in any questions you still have. I hope the numbers don't dwindle to nothing. We're gonna guide you. We'll involve Mike and Sabrina can handle just about anything. So don't sweat it. Let's keep on answering questions because you asked really good ones. I'm gonna jump around. Sabrina, Vanessa asks, I'm an international nurse from Haiti with an asylum status in the US. I recently passed the NCLEX RN exam. I'd like to know what's the best pathway to have my green card.
Sure. So congratulations. That's awesome. And I'm assuming if your asylee status has been approved, you have an EAD, so you can work on that. And also if you're from Haiti, you're eligible for TPS, which is temporary protected status. And I always recommend everyone just apply for that because that doesn't grant you any kind of real status in the US, but it at least allows you to work, and you'd have to renew it every year, but it's a good backup plan. For whatever reason, if your refugee status is not, approved in the end, then that's kind of a problem because you don't really have a real status. Then you would keep working on TPS. But if your refugee status is approved, you can keep working on the refugee status. And then after a year, you're allowed to apply for a green card on your own. So you don't actually need any sponsorship. And that's pretty much the best way to go.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Yeah.
Another good question. Anonymous attendee asks, hello, I lived in US, but my sister lives in Canada on a work permit. She passed her New York RN test. I'm assuming that's the licensure. NCLEX, is there any way so she can work in the US and get her green card? Her husband and son can come with her too. Wonder if does that make sense, Sabrina?
Yeah, I just keep the question up so I can just make sure I understand it faster. Yeah, so she basically, I'm assuming she's not a Canadian citizen because then she would have the TN visa pathway available to her. But if she's not, a citizen of Canada, then basically she would just follow the H-1B pathway. And then, like we said, if you work with us, then you get your H-1B, and then the employer, after about 6 months to a year, depending on the hospital, will, apply for that first step of the green card process, the I-140. Yeah, so that's pretty much what she would do.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right. I guess SA asks a similar question to 2 questions ago. Can an asylee who is an RN get sponsored, Sabrina?
Yeah, honestly, you can't really get sponsored because technically you're not in the US with any kind of legal status. But like I said, hopefully you become a refugee, your application is approved, and then you can apply for a green card on your own after a year on that status. Otherwise, you just work on your EAD that you have now. And which country are they from?
Don't know, SA. Yeah, I don't know. Not sure.
Okay, yeah. Well, if you're from I would go on the TPS list, just type in TPS, temporary protected status, and see if the country you're from is on that list. And that's a good backup plan just in case your refugee status is not approved. And honestly, unfortunately, that is something we need to think about because every year it gets harder and harder to become refugee, depending on where you're from and your situation and your case, it might not be approved. So you always have to be thinking to the next step. And always there's an option to go back home and do the, H-1B process, apply here, get approved, and then go home. But, I'm guessing if you're a refugee or asylee, you don't want to. That's the reason why you're here. But for example, if you're from a country like Ukraine, there's provisions. Obviously, you can't go to Ukraine to go to the embassy there, even if you wanted to. So they set up in Germany to be the main hub for Ukrainians to get visa status. So that's always an option. But it really depends what country you're in and what options are available to you.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Yeah.
I think I see one more question from someone new, and then I think I'm going to be mindful of everyone's time. We're going to send you a recording and we're going to send you application link. Hector, do you mind sending the registered nurse application link one more time in the chat? We're available to you. So if you didn't get a chance to talk with us, I know Himani, I'm sorry you had your hand raised, but I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. We'll be able to connect with you after. I'm going to do a follow-up email. So don't worry, you're not losing track of us. we're going to be in touch with you. I'll say the last question is, I'd say, so I'm going to go back to you, Satabdi. You asked good questions because this one, Sabrina, what are the requirements to change the status from J2 to H1B except waiver? I have a CS report from CGFNS and an RN license.
Cool.
Wonderful.
So you're good to go in that sense. What I would do is I would go on the government website and check if there are any country, the requirements that you have to go back to your home country for 2 years. If there is, and you need a waiver, then you need to get that job offer and then apply for the visa waiver, the J1 visa waiver, and then get that approved and before you apply for H1B. So it is a process, but it's possible. And, we're open to working with people on J2 that do have country requirements, because like I said, we could always, apply for that J1 waiver. So, apply and then let's talk and let's see what your requirements are. But you can go online and check, depending, there'll be like a nurse category, and then you can check if there's any requirements.
All right, so what we'll do is this. There's a reason I didn't answer some of your questions in the Q&A. If you're asking questions and you don't have an NCLEX yet, don't worry. We also have options for you, but it's not pertinent to this conversation. It's a different program that we offer. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not ignoring you, but if you do not yet have an NCLEX from the United States, we have another path I'm going to ask you to apply to. And we can guide you. That is called our Nursing Launchpad, where we actually can offer a US BSN. If you don't yet have an NCLEX, we are going to offer you a United States BSN. All right, I think let's be mindful of everyone's time. It was so good. It was such a good webinar. I want to make sure we don't, I want to make sure everyone had a chance to talk. I know not everyone did. I really appreciate it. We really appreciate your joining us today. I will send you an email. Don't worry, with the recording, you can get in contact with us. Any questions that weren't answered, please, you can get back in contact with us. Sabrina, any parting words?
Yeah, I still see some great questions here. But if you really, if you want them answered, you could always email me. I'm happy to do that. But also, if you just apply via the link, you'll talk to Eric. Then you'll talk, I believe, to Jason, just to make sure, analyzing your background, if you study in a different country for your RN, making sure everything's good. And then you'll meet with me anyways, for a one-on-one immigration consultation to see, what path is best for you. But yeah, I'll put my email address here. And if we didn't answer your question, please go ahead and email me and I'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah. Thanks, Sabrina. Hector, any parting words?
No, thank you so much. This has been great, and again, we are here to help you. That's what our team is here to serve and make sure that you have everything you need to come to the US.
Yeah.
And can we put the email address for the general questions, for example, what states do we work with, yada yada, all that, non-immigration stuff. Can you guys leave I don't know what the email address is, to be honest.
You mean healthcare?
Yes, the healthcare.
Yeah. So I have that link right there, healthcare@inspringcareers.com. I am going to email all of you. So Himani, I see it. I loud and clear. I'm going to send you multiple links. I'm going to summarize everything with the recording. So we're not going anywhere. I just want to be mindful of our time. We really appreciate you all attending today. And Sabrina, Hector, and myself will be back in contact with all of you. Please follow the links that I send you to apply, and that's the best way we can review your case. And we'll make sure we make it very clear in the email. So you're all going to get the email because you registered. I know your email. Hector says, make sure you don't spam me you get my email. All right. All right. So everyone, we really appreciate your time. I know you have a lot of questions and it's so good. Best way to get in contact with us now is follow my lead on email. I'm going to give you a bunch of links in the recording. Can't wait to talk to you. All right. Take care, everyone. Best of luck. See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.